Welcome to the Mexpreneurs Podcast, the podcast about the stories of Mexican tech startup founders who are building world-class, fast-growing companies and having a positive impact at a large scale. My name is Sergio Chavez. I'm a Mexican based in Germany, a tech startup founder, executive, and mentor, and your host. Today we have Dylan Roman with us. Dylan is co-founder and CEO of NIU NIU, an e-waste recycling startup based in Mexico City. NIU NIU is the operating system of e-waste. Through the use of AI, NIU NIU maximizes critical mineral recovery like lithium, cobalt, and rare earths while minimizing the environmental and social impact of e-waste management. It also accelerates the recovery of essential resources from post-consumption and post-industrial electronic scrap. In addition, via image recognition and through its platform, NIU NIU classifies and distributes e-waste, which is then transformed into key materials needed for electric vehicles production and energy transition. Dylan is originally from Mexico City. He studied at the Colegio Alemán in Mexico, which led him to move to Germany to study his Bachelor in Energy and Process Engineering. He then worked as a researcher and consultant for different companies like Siemens and government institutions like ProMexico, GIZ and USAID, which allowed him to travel the world and gain a deep understanding on the issues and business opportunities in renewable energies and pollution. In addition, he joined startups in fields like sustainable finance and big data analysis before starting NIU NIU. I hope you enjoy. Support for this episode comes from Partnership Leaders, the leading community of partnership professionals and executives in SaaS and tech with over 1,500 members globally. We're living in the decade of the ecosystem, and every CEO needs to become a partnership leader. Just take a look at the top companies in the world today like Microsoft, Google, and Apple. They have all become platform companies, and partnership executives in IT have been the ones leading these transformations. Partnership Leaders brings these executives together and is building a playbook to enable CEOs and business leaders across industries to transform their organizations into platform companies. If you're a tech startup founder, Partnership Leaders is the place for you to learn how to leverage partnerships to take your business to the next level. I'm a member of PL and co-host of the Germany chapter and have seen firsthand the richness and value of this incredible community. Visit partnershipleaders.com to learn more and to apply to become a member. Make sure to mention in your application that Mexpreneurs referred you so you can receive a special price if your application is accepted. So, hello, Dylan. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Sergio. Thank you very much.
So, Dylan, please tell us, who is Dylan Roman?
I was born in Mexico. That partly defines also my personality and my historical background. But I grew up in a German context, in the German school for 15 years, and then I spent all my adult life in Germany for practically 15 years also there. So I think I'm a mix between both cultures. I think my personality has been defined by curiosity and activity and perseverance.
And how exactly did that transition between Germany and Mexico happen?
In my case, practically wasn't decided by me. My parents sent me to the German school, so I started learning German and let's say grammatic aspects of German and German culture such as Allgemeine Entchen and Pumuckl very early in my childhood. I was very early also in the same class with German children. I think at that age, you don't really understand what different nationalities are, and you just collaborate and play together.
And you mentioned, so you lived about half of your your youth in Mexico, but then you decided to move to Germany. And how exactly did that happen, that transition to Germany? I'm asking because I also have the opportunity to meet different students from the German school, from the Colegio Humboldt, who actually, some of them went to Germany, but then after a year or two, actually decided to come back to Mexico. They didn't really feel very comfortable, or I don't know, it was very cold, or it was different than what they were expected. So not everyone makes that big transition and stays there for such a long period, but it appears that you came to Germany and then stayed there for much longer. So how was that transition for you?
I think the university took most of my time. In that moment, I was studying in TU München. It was harder than I expected initially. I started cutting back the time that I would spend doing sports. At that time, I was doing triathlon in Mexico. First, I stopped swimming, then I stopped biking and only kept on running. I think, like university was taking a lot of my time and a lot of my energy. And for me, going back wasn't really an option, only if they would send me back, right? But not by my own. Practically, that was the transition. It was, kind of difficult because in Germany, you have to take care of many things that in certain contexts as in Mexico, you don't have to take care of. And it was the first time that I was living outside of my parents' house. So that also, implied new challenges at the personal everyday level, but that take also time in the everyday life. It was good. I would recommend it to leave the comfort zone that we sometimes have in Mexico, at least in some contexts. And I think that was it.
And you then moved to Germany. You came here to study university. And how exactly did your career evolve from that? What was actually the path for you to ultimately step into entrepreneurship?
Well, maybe the reason why I studied energy and process engineering and not politics or cinema was because I thought that engineering would be a more hands-on, practical way of making a change or challenging the situation as it was or as it is. The other two paths for me were a bit less direct. So that's how I decided to study engineering. That practically was giving me some kind of line along my path. I studied first the Bachelor on Energy and Process Engineering, and then spent some time writing my thesis in Paris. Then I went to ProMexico, where I finished my thesis working in renewable energies. There I learned a lot about foreign investment, which wasn't really directly linked to what I was expecting to be doing. But it was a very, very kind of real world experience of how these technologies are applied, right? There I started thinking, okay, what are different paths that I could take in order to provide the change that I've been thinking of, or identifying problems that need to be solved. I think that's how it started to grow, this idea of being an entrepreneur. Still, I worked for companies, large companies in Europe, in order to gain experience on how they, like structure their work, etc. Then I did my master's in urban management, which at that time was related to the topic of smart cities and smart grids. That connected well the social aspect with the technical background that I already had. After that, I identified that the universities didn't have really the tools for analyzing large amounts of data. And I decided to apply for a Norwegian company that had at that moment the tools to do that. I worked there for 2 years. Practically, that's where my entrepreneurial career started, because without knowing it, we were applying agile management, Scrum, sprints, and all of these tools that are very helpful in an entrepreneurial journey.
ProMexico was your first exposure towards becoming an entrepreneur, towards building your own business. Then, based on what you were mentioning, so you didn't go directly from there into building your own company, but actually you had different steps in between, including these Norwegian company that you work for. And that was in Norway, or that was in Germany?
That was in Berlin as well.
In Berlin as well.
Yes.
And you were also mentioning about these interests that you were having on addressing these challenges happening in terms of energy, in terms of the environment. So could you dive a little bit deeper into that? So what exactly were those challenges that you saw? What was it that created that interest for you to look into them?
I think I started, like having the first internship that I did was at Semarnat, the Mexican Environmental Ministry, as I was 15. So I had this curiosity for environmental aspects very early in my career or even personal path. That practically took me to also study this aspect of energy. In that moment, renewable energies were emerging. Photovoltaic wasn't still that big. The wind parks were also, like something that was still in process in Mexico. And my thesis of engineering was exactly about renewable energies in Mexico. So there I identified what were the schemes that practically allowed for renewable energies to be implemented. In that moment, The major scheme was the feed-in tariff, which was, a payment for practically feeding the grid with renewable energies. And very large projects in Mexico were just about to be built. And I identified that the size of those projects were either extremely large and only huge companies could put them in place, or very small in the sense offline, practically networks. And then practically I identified that was also the problem in Latin America, and that it was related to funding. So that's how I started my first company in Germany. That was practically an SPV for doing crowd investing in Europe and financing medium-sized projects for energy efficiency and renewable energies in Latin America.
And you started that while being in Germany. So was that after your experience in the Norwegian company based in Berlin, or was it in parallel to that?
No, in parallel to that, we tried something else. We applied for Exist using the tool that I had at work, but that didn't work. Then after I quit my job in that moment I was a data broker. Then I spent some months in Mexico, like 3 months in Mexico, to reconnect a little bit with the country after so many years outside. And when I came back, I had already the idea, had already some contacts, and put that company in place.
And what exactly were you doing? So you were mentioning about also investments in Latam, but what exactly was the business about? And is that business still running, or you ended up closing that business? What happened with that?
First, I had to find partners that could practically work on both sides. One would be the crowd investing platform that takes a while to open a crowd investing platform in Germany or in Europe. On the other side, it would be the implementing companies. So I spoke to some people that already I knew from German school or from other contexts that were working in those areas, and asked if they would be interested in practically getting this loan from the crowd in Europe. And they were interested. And then I went to the other side practically and asked if they would be interested in funding projects that would be less of a development project and more of practically a business project related to renewable energies or energy efficiency specifically. And they were also interested. What I didn't foresee was that I needed to open up a company that allowed for these kind of transactions. And that took a while and a lot of lawyers, but it was possible. So I opened that company and we started implementing in Brazil. It was actually, we were purchasing the electrification agreements of small cities, and we would change practically the lamps for efficient lamps, for LED lamps in the luminaires. And with the savings that we would reach through changing the technology, we would pay back the investors in Europe. The main risk that I didn't foresee in that specific moment was the currency risk, right? Because I was taking a loan practically in euros and then investing it in Latin American currency, in that case, reais. And, like if the currency would go down in Brazil, then even if it would yield what we would have been expected in terms of efficiency, it would have been difficult to pay back the loan. So that's practically why I decided to stop that company until blockchain solves it.
And how long were you running that company?
That was only like 1.5 years. I also stopped because I was invited to do a different project with colleagues in Germany. And we applied for Exist, and that time we won it. So that's practically why I decided, to be full-time on that other project.
So let me try to make a summary. So you came here, you came to Germany, did your bachelor, your university. You then went to ProMexico, went through other companies, started your initial business, went back to Mexico, created these investment platform, then went back to Germany to participate in these other projects from your colleagues. You basically were like pretty much back and forth, participating in different initiatives. And you were constantly traveling between Europe and Mexico all the time, or you were just based in Mexico, or you were just based in Germany. How exactly did that movement work?
One of the ideas of the company was that I would spend a little bit more time in Brazil. Unfortunately, it didn't really come to that. So I was mainly working on the European side with crowdfunding platforms, and we were just online working with the people in Brazil. and they would take care practically of the contracts with the suppliers, etc.
You closed that crowdfunding platform, and then you started working in this other project from your colleagues with the Exits Scholarship. And what exactly was that project about?
I'm not sure what they are doing now, but in that moment was to measure the impact of European banks in Latin American microfinance institutions. And practically, I think the main characteristic was that we were measuring specifically CO2 emissions or related to the technologies that were funded through the microfinance institutions. That was practically the solution and the problem.
And you then moved back to Germany to work on that project, or you were in Mexico at that time?
At that point, I was in Germany, and the project was developed also in Berlin.
And how much time were you full time at that project? Were you part time? Were you doing other ventures in parallel?
No. We actually had to sign that we would be full time working on that, and it was practically 1 year all in all.
But then at some point of time, you left the team to create another business, to join another project. What exactly happened afterwards?
Actually, we had different perspectives of how to build a business, mainly on the agility of how to iterate on solutions for the problem. And I think it was the right decision to take different paths, so that they had based the solution practically on one PhD that was developed from one of the co-founders, and they solely believed that that would be the solution. So I think it would be the right path for them to follow on that belief. And I decided then to start doing consultancy. I went back to doing consultancy for international agencies like GIZ, for whom I wrote my master thesis, or I had written my master thesis for them a couple of years before, for USAID, the US American Cooperation Agency.
And what exactly were you doing for both of those agencies? And probably just for our listeners who are not familiar with GIZ, what exactly is that? And what were you doing with them in terms of consultancy?
They were mainly waste-related projects and business models on how to deal with the plastics, practically. One was in India. We were helping 50 pilot projects that were developed in 50 different cities to collect and segregate practically post-consumption single plastic waste, which is practically the worst kind of, and helping them develop their business model on the best way. And the other one was similar. It was what they call the bioregion of Yucatan Peninsula. It was also to develop business models with players on the ground that were already doing something similar or related to plastics. Could be hotels, NGOs, civil associations, etc., that would be interested in doing something, and I helped them develop their business model to understand if the solution that they were trying to put in place would be also economically viable, right? And to identify who would be the beneficiaries, not only the customers, because there's two different things, right, of the solutions that they were providing, and how they could develop a solution that would also allow them to provide the service or whatever they would be doing for a longer period of time.
And that means that you were traveling to India, you were traveling to Yucatan to meet with the different teams on site?
Yes, that was very exciting. Yeah, that happened. It was one trip to India, and I spent 3 months in Yucatan Peninsula.
And how much time were you then working as a consultant overall for those two agencies?
After that, we started the project for UNDP, and practically that project lasted for 1.5 years. That was related to electronic waste. And that's how practically this company, NIU NIU, started, because we identified during the 1.5 years project that there were many challenges that we would not be able to solve from the consultancy perspective, and we would not be able to create those capacities in the companies that we were working with. Identifying those problems and having tested solutions for them, I decided to create NIU NIU, which is the company that practically identified the problems related to the circular economy of electronics and that creates solutions for solving them.
It's fascinating what you're mentioning in terms of how all those different topics regarding environment and have been evolved through your career? No? Because I think you were already in that path, no? But from what you mentioned, apparently with your consulting activities, that's where you got a much deeper understanding into circular economy, into e-waste. And what was the realization, or what was, let's say, the finding that led you into ultimately establishing NIU NIU? What was the compelling event that moved you into establishing NIU NIU? And let's say leaving that consulting activity that you were doing and focusing on now creating your own business?
Well, I think, like the curiosity that I mentioned in the beginning, once I saw the opportunity and I had, had already a couple of entrepreneurial activities, I couldn't stop myself, for trying it out. Of course, I had a little bit more experience and we had already tested and put, the report that we produced in that moment was 10,000 pages long. It was a very deep dive on the problems and the solutions and many prototypes and analyzing different aspects, not only economic, but social and environmental. And we saw also the trend of ESG happening very strongly in Europe for OEMs and retailers of electronics, and also a need for traceability of the materials that are put into new technologies, like, let's say, the batteries of electric vehicles. I identified electronic waste to contain a lot of the critical minerals that will be required for the energy transition, and that practically what sometimes is seen as a problem, which is e-waste, it could be a solution if properly handled.
If I understand correctly, you then from Germany moved back to Mexico to start NIU NIU. Is that correct? Or did you start it in Germany?
No. The project I was doing for the UN was already in Mexico. So at that point, I already, not completely moved to Mexico because I still have my apartment in Berlin, but I mainly moved to Mexico, let's say it like that. And I've been here. I'm in Mexico right now, and I've been here since February 2021, practically. I mean, coming back and forth, but mainly in Mexico.
And why establishing NIU NIU in Mexico and not in Germany? Or why did you decide to physically move to Mexico to build your business there? What was the major rationale of doing it in Mexico versus doing it in Germany, or even doing it someplace else?
The UN project was here, so I knew the context already quite well. And practically also the pandemic made it very clear that the supply of these critical minerals wasn't safe nor environmentally sound. Like during the pandemic, the supply chain of chips, which was also related to the minerals contained in these chips, was very high priority in the economy. And this practically changed the supply chain of many companies because of that could be stopped by any kind of problem that happens globally. So the nearshoring aspect came practically to life very quickly, and also the technological aspect that had been developed in the US over the past, I would say, 2.5 years or 3 years. So those technologies were ready for refining, for example, critical minerals or metals, or even, like the battery recycling plants. I saw the opportunity of connecting the largest e-waste generators in Mexico with the refineries in the US.
So then, of course, being in Mexico, it was an important decision for building the business, to be close to those technology providers, close to the waste collectors. So being in Mexico played a significant portion for building the NIU.
I mean, it wasn't strategically thought like that, but then as like the pandemic developed and I saw what was happening, at a global scale, and identified the opportunities, then I said maybe it would be possible to build a narrative, let's say, around it.
So that was during the pandemic, but now today, how is the setup? Like the company, what I understand is you're active between Mexico, Germany, US. So how is your current setup nowadays? Because you've been in different places at different points of time, but what is your current setup like today?
The company is, and this is due to, the preferences of venture capital investors, is based in the US as a C Corp in Delaware. That is, let's say, the holding company, which is NIU NIU Resources Incorporated. And then we have 2 companies here in Mexico. With one, we do practically all the services and consultancy aspects related to e-waste, which is not only, like getting computers and dismantling them into pieces, there's also a lot of consultancy around it in order to give the traceability, to provide, like indicators, etc. And there's another company that's the one that's practically opening up the mobile phones, etc., and dismantling it and sorting the materials and then providing us the information that we digitize and give back to the companies. Practically, the operational part is in Mexico, in Mexico City. The dismantling part is in Guadalajara, and the holding in the US.
You're physically between Mexico, US, most of the time, but are you still going to Germany on a regular basis as you were doing in the past?
Yes, I am. I mean, to be honest, the most of the time I'm just in front of the computer, right? So where that happens, that changes, but mainly working from the computer, thanks to technology. Like all the meetings happen online, most of them, unless there are events like in the last couple of weeks, physical events where, let's say, battery events or startup events in Brazil that you have to attend in person, and then I definitely go there. And about the Europe, I try to spend 2 to 3 months a year in Europe. That also gives me some perspective of the challenges that I'm facing here and also ways to solve them, right? Because sometimes when you're just in one place, you stop seeing the possibilities of solving it by not taking distance of it.
Dylan, of course, we were going to dive a little bit deeper into NIU in our next interview. But what I would love to know is NIU being a company based in the US, Mexico, how exactly is that international reach that you're currently having? Like you were mentioning about e-waste being a big problem. Of course, you have a deep understanding of the environment. Like, what is that international reach that you guys are having nowadays with this venture?
E-waste is a global problem, right? We all produce e-waste around 8 to 13 kilograms every year of computers, mobile phones, etc. And it depends a little bit on the country, but more or less that's the range. The global north has already technological solutions in place to deal with it, which are less efficient, but more secure practically to the people that are dealing with electronic waste, which is practically crushing, shredding, and separating through different processes. And the global south practically has the same scheme for dealing with electronic waste, which is by hand, very often from the landfills, and is dismantling the electronics and what they call cannibalizing, which is taking out the things that could be easily sold, like, let's say, copper or aluminum. I mean, even in Berlin, we sometimes see TVs, that are shattered and they take the bulb out of it. So that problem that we find in the global south will be exacerbated when the Stockholm and the Basel Convention hit in on the 1st of January of 2025, because all transboundary movements of e-waste will have to be done as hazardous materials. So this is something that stopped practically the export of batteries and printed circuit boards from Mexico to other countries back in 2021. And that is one of the problems that we're solving. So we are reconnecting practically with the generators of e-waste with the large refineries that can extract the critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, platinum from printed circuit boards, gold at a large scale. So I think this is a business that naturally connects practically the different nations and works best at a nation scale. At the moment, we are just connecting Mexico and the US mainly. Next step will be to connect Mexico with Europe. We have currently interest from people in India to buy the license at the country state. MENA region has also, because they have a very similar relation on electronic waste as we have with the US, they have it with Europe. They are generators of e-waste, but they don't have the technology to process it. So they send the PCBs and batteries to Europe, as well as Sub-Saharan Africa. And in Latin America, we have found also entrepreneurs that are working with recycling and that don't know what to do with electronic waste or who to sell it to, how to make a new business line based on electronic waste. So I think we will be able to help like this kind of entrepreneurs in Brazil or in Guatemala in the years to come.
It's fascinating, especially the global reach. And as you mentioned, it's a global problem for which there's currently not an optimal solution, and definitely a big opportunity for you guys moving forward. And of course, as I mentioned, we'll dive deeper in the next interview to learn more about that. But Dylan, since we're reaching the end of our conversation, what I would love to know is what will be your best advice for other aspiring founders? I think you have an incredible trajectory in terms of entrepreneurship. You started different types of businesses. You work in different places, Mexico, Europe, US, had a global experience. What will be your best advice for those that would like to pursue a similar path to yours, especially from an entrepreneur perspective?
I mean, something that we hear very often is perseverance as something that is helpful for entrepreneurs. But I think trying things out, being curious is more important, and being consistent. Perseverance, it will come to the point where I think you have to decide, if you're going to take all the downside related to what you are doing. But I think in an early stage, being curious and being consistent, at least for a specific period of time, like if you decide to work for 3 months on one project, but then do it every day and practically set up some goals that you have every week and then track how you perform. And after 3 months, you identify that it wasn't really what you wanted, then it's probably time to let it go. I wouldn't at an early stage stick with, till the bitter end, but be perseverant and try things out. And who knows, maybe you come back to that idea later on once you have gained more experience. So that would be my advice.
Fantastic. And I think it's also these, you see it every day with startups, with these pivots, how one idea evolves into the next big idea. But as you mentioned, sticking around with something, giving it some time to mature, and then taking a decision afterwards. It's super valuable learning for everyone. Fantastic. Well, Dylan, thank you very much for being here. Looking forward to our next conversation, and talk to you soon.
Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you. And thanks to you for joining us today. Please remember to subscribe via your favorite podcast app to be notified about new episodes and share with us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. Thank you also to the Mexpreneurs team, Valeria Morel, Hector Barragan from Hyper Voltage, Francisco Jaimes, Pamela Elizalde, Katia Cruz, Rocío Marroquín. I am Sergio Chavez. See you next time.